There it is. Okay, good. Sorry, my computer had to update Windows, and it was like a 45-minute update, and I had all these tabs open with like stuff to talk about, and I literally walked in the door, and my phone pinged with a WhatsApp message from an Egyptologist who I know, Dr. Sarah Parkak, who said to a group chat, "Wow, big news!" And I was like, "Oh man, I was thinking of live streaming, so let's talk about this." So let's dig in. We live in a world where there's so much insane news happening around us all the time. And with politics, and in particular from where I stand, cuts to education and to science. I just saw on social media that hundreds of people were laid off from the National Science Foundation just today. But I think it's important to also talk about some good news. And so we have some good news. So I just opened up a beer. It's 8:30 here, and I'm ready to chat about this new discovery. In Egypt, announced today, there was the discovery of a new royal tomb, and the headline actually says that it was the first royal tomb to be found since King Tut. So this is big news, right? So if you've not heard of King Tut, well, let's go see who King Tut is, because this is what we're expecting, right? We're expecting this kind of stuff from a royal tomb, right? So this is what we're expecting to find. And the first royal tomb since Howard Carter found King Tut. So this is what we have. It is a different Tut. It is, instead of Tutankhamun, it is King Thutmose II. So this is big news. It's from the Valley of the Kings in Luxor. Over here, I have been here. It is lovely. The Luxor Museum is over here. The Karnak Temple, we'll talk about some of that in a bit. But the Valley of the Kings in Queens is on the west bank of the Nile, which is where we see these royal tombs always being positioned in ancient Egypt anyway. I have a whole video that we're just finishing up on the development of royal tombs. So in some ways, this is very apropos. And so it was discovered in the Valley of the Kings, near the tombs of Thutmose I and Hatshepsut, which Thutmose II was married to Queen Hatshepsut, and we'll talk about her in a second. So this is a big deal. This is the last tomb that needed to be discovered from the 18th dynasty in Egypt. So we're talking, something kind of cool and monumental to have being discovered. So this is exactly what we want to be seeing with new archaeological excavation. I can tell you, as an archaeologist, we need to do a lot more. There's so much more to discover throughout this planet, and we really need to fill in these kind of details. And this tomb has a really cool story, which I personally think is really relevant to some of the discussions that go on around us. So in particular, thinking about how do we know what this is? Because unlike King Tut's tomb, this tomb has been emptied in the past. So the tomb was, what was reported is there's not a whole lot of material in there. Certainly there's no mummy in here, because the mummy of Thutmose II was found over 100 years ago. Not too far away, but in a different village outside of Luxor called Deir el-Bahri. And we'll talk about that location in a second, because that's part of the bigger picture of this tomb that's really important. So this is actually the mummy on display in museums in Egypt. This is Thutmose II, who was part of the 18th dynasty in the late second millennium BC, second half of the second millennium. So this is cool stuff. And what's really interesting kind of is, all right, how did they know what this is? So there is no mummy in there. Most of the valuables have since been looted. So how do they actually, or at least moved? How do they actually know who was in here? Well, the reality is that they found objects with writing on them. Where was it? So they found alabaster vessels. Khalid, one of the Egyptian archaeologists there, what's really cool about this is the very first royal tomb to be discovered using modern archaeological methods, and it was a joint Egyptian-British team, which I think is really, really interesting because I think the Egyptians need to control their own cultural heritage. So I'm very pleased to see the contributions that the Egyptians made here. I mean, these days, most significant discoveries in Egypt are made by Egyptian teams because the Egyptian archaeologists are phenomenal. I've worked with some of them at Abydos, further south than Luxor. So yeah, so some of these alabaster vessels, Muhammad Khalid mentioned, and he is, he is the Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities. And so they found alabaster vessels that mentioned the name of King Thutmose II and identified him as the deceased king, as well as the name of his wife, Hatshepsut, who would have been the one to bury him, since Hatshepsut lived much longer than him by several decades, and actually became basically the pharaoh after his death, because Thutmose III was a little kid when he ascended to the throne, in a sense. And so Hatshepsut, it's been a long day. Hatshepsut was actually the one who ruled, and so we know a lot about her. I thought I had a page up with some images of her. Maybe I don't. Let's quickly show you her. Yeah, so she was the royal wife of Thutmose II. She was also the daughter of Thutmose I, and then she was the mother of Thutmose III, and she essentially took over Egypt. After a generation later, after Thutmose III, actually much of her memory was erased. So we can see, if we look up, this is the problem with the Windows restart. I had all this stuff ready. Hatshepsut iconoclasm. Some of her statues were defaced, for example. Here, this one in the Met Museum, you can see it was chipped away because they did not want to remember her as ruling a later dynasty and things like that. And so what we know about Hatshepsut, therefore, is limited to what has survived for us. Now, what's really cool is the story of this tomb, from what we can tell. Now, this is the very first announcement today, so there's a lot of details that we expect to have come out soon. But what is really interesting is, as I mentioned, the mummy of King Thutmose II was not found in the tomb. It was found over 100 years ago in the late 19th century at Deir el-Bahri. And so this is actually extremely significant, because at Deir el-Bahri, so let's pull this up. So Deir el-Bahri is here. It is, I checked on Google Maps, it's like an hour-long walk from the Valley of the Kings. I don't think I've ever been to Deir el-Bahri. I have been to the Valley of the Kings, and I've been to Luxor. So there was all this trouble at the end of the New Kingdom. So after the 18th dynasty, after Rameses III passed away, he was stabbed in his throat. And after that, there was a series of very short reigns by various pharaohs named Rameses, Rameses the IV, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, etc. And then after that, it entered the third intermediate period, where governance started to break down. And during this period of governance breaking down, tomb robbery was a significant issue. Now, what that means is we have evidence of the mummies of various pharaohs being moved around. And so we know that tomb robbery has always been an issue in Egypt. This is why, for example, they changed from building above ground pyramids to building underground tombs that were more difficult to find. This was in order to be able to protect their pharaohs, their deceased, from robbers. And so in the end, what we have is pharaohs being moved around. For example, Hatshepsut, her mummy was found not in a royal tomb, but actually it ended up being moved in an emergency into the tomb of her nurse. And so that is actually where her mummy was found in more recent excavations. We do have her actual royal tomb, which is near to this new tomb. And in there was found one tooth. And when they found her mummy more recently in the nurse's tomb, they were able to tell that that one tooth fit in the socket where it was missing in that actual complete skeleton found in the nurse's tomb. Now, what's really cool is the story of this Deir el-Bahri. This is actually, so let's check it out. So there's a cool little story here. So this is Deir el-Bahri, and it's a funerary complex with various mortuary temples for various pharaohs, and in particular, it saw a flourishing during this 18th dynasty. So, for example, there is the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, and this is actually known as Djeser Djesero, meaning the Holy of Holies, and it's actually fairly well preserved. Here, for example, are the sanctuary doorways to here. And so nearby, though, and there's also the mortuary temple of her son, Thutmose III. And then sort of in this, where is it? Where's the mummy cache? Here we go. In these royal tombs, in tomb TT 320, there was a hidden recess in the cliffs right there. And in there, in the late 19th century, were found 30 mummies in one tomb. And this included a wide range of pharaohs from a variety of different dynasties. So it included what? Ahmose I, Amenhotep I, Thutmose I, Thutmose II. That's who we're talking about here. Thutmose III, Ramses I, Seti I, Ramses II, and Ramses IX. And then also a series of high priests and others. And so this is this mummies cache that is extremely important. It's an extremely pivotal moment in Egyptology when it was found. And actually, the story is quite interesting. Eric Klein tells it in his book, the After 1177 BC. Wait a second. No, I think I'm on the wrong page. Oh, come on, where are we? One second. He has such a fun story in here. So yeah, the Deir el-Bahri cache, it was found, and so it was found by a member of the Abd el-Rasul family, who actually, he claimed that a goat had fallen in, right? And that's how he found it accidentally. But it seems actually, after more recent study of some of the documents around the discovery at the end of the 19th century, that this family actually controlled this tomb and slowly started selling mummies, mummy parts, and different artifacts from with it illicitly on the market. And so in the end, the Egyptologists had to go in and do kind of a raid and clear the tomb of all of his mummies and stuff, I think in one night is what I read, because it was a closely guarded family secret. And it was, yeah, so it was finally uncovered in 1881 by Emile Bruch, who was sent by Gaston Maspero, the new director of Egypt Antiquities Service. And he hired several hundred local villagers and removed all of these reburied pharaohs, queens, and their goods from the tomb within a period of only 48 hours. So this is how during the, back in the Wild West, let's say, days of Egyptology, this was how this had to happen, because there were so many worries about the black market at that time. And I mean, obviously, that's still a worry today as well. And so, yeah, so this is an important story and an important context, an important find. And so I think this helps us understand why there's so many tombs without mummies in them. Because, well, there's like dozens just in this one tomb, for example. And some of our most significant pharaohs from Egyptian history all ended up in this mummy cache. Here, wait, I think I have a diagram of it here. Here is the entrance shaft to it. And so you can see why it was not actually discovered for 3,000 years after all. Because it was an effective hiding spot, while the more monumental and impressive royal tombs obviously were not such an effective hiding spot. And so that's, in a sense, why we don't have mummies in so many royal Egyptian tombs. It's because they took care to move them to protect their deceased pharaohs and move them around one step ahead of these grave robbers. And in fact, we have written evidence for this activity. So there's a series of papyri that record right at the time after the Ramses. I mentioned Ramses like 4th through 10th. Well, during that period, in the sort of after the end of the major civilizations in the Bronze Age, so we're talking like the 11th century BC, So after 1177 BC, go read Eric Klein's book. I have a video, by the way, on this channel interviewing Eric Klein about that book, and we talk about this. So we have a series of tomb robbery papyri. For example, one in the Liverpool Museum. There's another in the British Museum. Oh, this is the translation of it, but my computer crashed, so I couldn't get the right quote that I wanted. But there's the Abbott Papyrus, which is in the British Museum. Where did that go? I thought I had a tab up. 1 second. Just so you can see it. Yeah, and so these detail the trials during these early reigns of, I forget if it's Ramses. Let's see. Let's see. It was page 48 up here. During Ramses IX is when all these robberies happen, and we have these papyri that depict the trials and how these tomb robbers were guilty and they were sentenced to execution, because that is the punishment for tomb robbery, for grave robbery. It obviously does not work because there was so much grave robbery that happened. That's why, to be honest, we only have a few extremely wealthy royal tombs like King Tut's that we are all familiar with. That's why that was the heyday of Egyptomania, was when they found King Tut's tomb, because it was actually untouched by these grave robbers. So in a sense, what's really interesting here is we knew that King Thutmose II tomb needed to be found. Egyptologists targeted this location. They did a survey in the Valley of the Kings, and originally the announcement of this tomb was mentioned in 2023. It hit the news that there was this announcement of a new royal tomb on the west bank of Luxor. So in a sense, this is follow-up news that is now reporting on the findings, where now, because of those alabaster jars, they have inscriptions and hieroglyphs on them that actually name who this was. And so it's that final piece to the puzzle that tells us the story of King Thutmose II and his burial. We already had his mummy, if you see what I mean, but now we know where his tomb was. And what the second thing that's really interesting about this tomb is it's not just due to grave robbing. There were actually flooding going on, I guess, during an extensive flood of the Nile, or one of its channels. So ancient floods. They submerged the tomb, and I think it's this one. Yeah, it actually shows where the flood water reached, about 1.4 meters above the chamber floor. And in order to remove the mummy and some of these grave goods, the ancient Egyptians that were protecting these deceased individuals and their goods actually had to create a second entrance, or exit, really, to be able to exit by, to be able to carry that mummy off to, they don't know exactly where it went first, but eventually it ended up in Deir el-Bahri, which is also ironic. That tomb in Deir el-Bahri here, it's actually just off from the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, which of course was the wife of Thutmose II. And so there's a nice sort of connection here of seeing this mummy being carried away for protection and then being deposited in a new place along with other royal mummies from the same family as well as from other dynasties, in a location, of course, that is connected to these dynasties at the temple of near the temple of Hatshepsut. And so I think there's this really interesting sort of parallel here, and I think it's really important because it tells us a lot about Egyptology and about why we have so many Egyptian tombs that have been robbed in the past. And this was an issue that went on for thousands of years. It was not only this one period in Egyptian history where we have evidence for grave robbing. As I mentioned, the idea is that they changed from pyramids to underground tombs to protect from it. And then we have even later evidence during the Greco-Roman period of additional grave robbing still going on of these earlier kinds of tombs. And so this is a real issue, and we can feel for these ancient Egyptians and how they had to take these efforts to be able to protect their rulers, their loved ones, their ancestors from this kind of wanton robbery that was going on, because they buried their wealthy with so much wealth, because that was their customs, that was part of their religion. In this tomb, by the way, there was part of the inscriptions from the book of Imidwat, so one of the books of the dead, that it's one of the most important funerary books, which is written to help guide these royals to the underworld. So we certainly know it was a tomb. It was intentioned in that way. And so it really, what I also find interesting is we can see how even at that cache, that mummy cache in Deir el-Bahri, we can see that some of those individuals had moved multiple times. And this is where I suggest reading chapter 2 in Eric Klein. He's also written a biography on Thutmose III. So that goes into some of this detail as well. And Karakuni is written on Hatshepsut. So there's a lot of good material available for the public on this phenomenon of these kind of grave robberies, and what the Egyptians and how they struggled to protect their ancestors. And in some case, you know, they all ended up in Deir el-Bahri much later, hundreds of years later. So this reverence for previous rulers, it continued for hundreds of years, and the efforts that people took in order to protect their ancestors from this kind of wanton grave robbery. And in this case, with this tomb, also from damage due to natural disasters like flooding. And so it's really interesting to be able to put together this picture in more detail. And I'm really excited to see more publications on this and more information on this and more public understanding of this kind of struggle. So yeah, I think that to me is what I would consider what is so significant here, is this story of kind of moving mummies around in order to protect them from this kind of grave robbery. So yeah, so if people have any questions, I will stick around while I finish my beer and take a few questions, because I think that that's a good thing to do. We could chat about some other stuff as well. I have some more live streams coming up, for example. Tomorrow I will be talking with the working classicists, these authors who have published the periodic table of Greek mythology. So expect that tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. UK time. And then Thursday, I'll be talking with Dr. Moudia al-Rashid about her new book, Between Two Rivers, which is about cuneiform and about, it walks us through the city of and this museum that's there. And so there's some really interesting conversations to have there. And then on Friday, I'm going to talk with Tristan Boyle, an archaeologist, and we're going to talk about the death of archaeology and the problems that exist in our field, not just the external issues, but issues with how archaeologists present themselves and think about what we do and how we think about commercial archaeology as well as academic archaeology, because I think it's important to get some of this information out. Archaeology is more than just planned out excavations. So yeah, if you want to ask some questions in the chat, I will look at the chat now. Let's see. I have a good Welsh beer tonight, known as Dunbar. So it's an amber ale, and it's a good Welsh ale. It's delicious. Yeah, so that was to answer this question. Show us our beer, Dunbar. So yeah, so yes, I need to shave my beard. Thank you. I know. What can I say? I didn't shave my beard. Jeez. Why? The internet just brings out every comment that you could imagine. Like, get a life, people. Chill out. Did they also move the boats and the gold? So I don't think this tomb would have had any boats in it. It probably would have had wealthy artifacts in it. It's unclear is the answer, because we only end up with Thutmose II cached much later, hundreds of years later, in that mummy cache at Deir el-Bahri. So we do not know what happened. It's possible that these things were looted, or it's possible that they were moved from place to place, and maybe some of them that did not make it with all those mummies into their tombs. And I wanted to point out some of the people that were in the mummy cache. We have some of our most famous pharaohs. For example, Seti the First who I have worked near his temple. Let me pull that up really quickly. At Abydos, it's just an amazing temple. In Abydos, this is the temple of Seti I. Some of you might be familiar with it if you're not familiar with Egypt because of the king list that's there, or maybe with the helicopter that shows up on Ancient Aliens. This thing. And what this is, of course, is an inscription that was made by Seti I. And then the meaning of it was changed later on. So part of it was plastered over, and some new hieroglyphs were put in by Rameses II, who, by the way, was also found in that mummy cache. And so when the plaster eroded away, we ended up with what's called a palimpsest, where you have a bit of later writing intermingled with earlier writing, and it creates this image that kind of looks like a helicopter or a tank, or, you know, this helicopter and this tank. That's not what they are. There's some good diagrams out there, if we Google around, that shows this overlapping hieroglyphs here that we can actually read. So there is no helicopter, but what's cool is both Seti I and Ramses II were found together with Thutmose II, who we're talking about right now, right? Let's see, some other questions. We have, what are some archaeological footwear? Yeah, so I mean, look, it depends where you're working and what you're doing. If you're working in a place like Egypt, you probably want to wear something that's a little more breathable than, say, Milo tramping around in heavy-duty work/hike boots. But you definitely do not want to wear open-toed shoes like sandals in a trench, because for example, we map out with prism poles, and it has a sharp point on it. I once put a prism pole through my toe. It was not very fun. I was like, what, 22 at the time, I think, 21. So I recovered. I'm fine. I can walk fine. But I've seen people get hurt on site for wearing sandals. So if you're on a project with me, I do not let any students wear sandals on site. That said, there are certain contexts where you need to be walking around extremely, where the trench itself has so much fragile stuff in it that you actually do need to go barefoot or in socks. Socks are better because of DNA. So when I helped excavate, I was field director when we excavated the tomb of the Griffin warrior. Once we got down to the main artifacts in the tomb, by the way, I have a video on this channel about my time excavating the tomb of the Griffin warrior. Once we got down that far, there was so much bronze, it was so fragile, that we walked in wearing socks and not shoes, because we didn't want to damage anything. So it varies. On the other hand, I've done survey, where you're mapping and finding new sites, and I've done that in very rough terrain. For example, in Greece, the project Korphos Kalamianos, where the feet were the stones that we were hiking over were extremely jagged, and there were spikes this long. And my friend, by the way, Hussein Ozturk, who has promised, he's one of my best friends, he's an amazing archaeologist, an amazing teacher. He's promised to come on here and start doing some more regular live streams, because me and him have a really fun rapport. He put an olive branch that was broken off through his shoe and into his foot, and it was really, really a problem. Obviously, we had to take him to the hospital. With my prism pole disaster, I didn't need to. So you do want to take care with the footwear that you wear, and it varies based on where you are and what you are doing. But you want to think about breathability, whether things are fragile or whether you're in a dangerous situation where you need to wear more heavy-duty stuff. Okay, some more questions. Yes, I've been planning to make a video on the mummy cache, and I thought this was a good excuse to sort of introduce it a little bit. I'm working on slowly scripting a couple of videos on Egypt, because I'm writing about it in my book, and one of those videos will be, how do we know the pyramids are tombs? So you'll see it come up in there in more depth and more detail. And I'm also, of course, working on a video on those pesky granite vases. I figured them out, by the way. It was aliens. No, I'm joking. It was Egyptians. So yeah, let's see. Not right now. I think for that, you should go listen to my conversation with Eric Klein, where we talk about some of these later periods and things like that. Let's see. So yeah, if you all like this video, I don't know how many likes this video has. I guess I need to pull it up in YouTube and see. Um, so let's see. We have, how many likes do we have? We have 207 people apparently watching. We only have 166 likes. This is a problem. Witch doctor here is right. If you can all like, we can get up to 250 likes. I will chug this beer. I don't have any other booze near me, and I have to work tomorrow, so I'll just chug the beer. Get it up to 250 likes, and I will do it. I will chug the beer. Some music that I enjoy. I'm a rock and roll guy. I just saw Gogol Bordello and Dropkick Murphys just what 2 weeks ago here in Cardiff. I saw the Wailers. They also came through Cardiff recently. I saw Manu Chao. Those are the three concerts I recently. But yeah, I love jamming out. I play guitar. I play trumpet as well. I used to be really good at the trumpet, and I'm still decent at the guitar. Trumpet's tough to play by myself. Um, let's see. What Yeah, so you missed the earlier part of the stream, Martin, in a sense. There were a series of issues with grave robberies in ancient Egypt. And in this tomb, it looks like it was not first cleared out originally because of grave robbery, but that rather due to flooding. Also, why it's so damaged. Here we can pull up some of these images. You can see some of the damage here from the flooding. Um, this image also, yeah, you can see kind of the damage from this flooding. But later on, wherever they moved Thutmose II body, it was moved to an area where they were worried about grave robbing a few hundred years later because they moved this in addition to dozens other to the mummy cache at Deir el-Bahri. And we know that mummy, or not mummy, the grave robbing, we have ancient Egypt papyri that tell us about how they convicted grave robbers during the night and impaled them. So it's a really nasty execution. You see what I mean? I don't think I'd want to. I don't think I'd want to rob a grave. I'm happy to excavate material under permit and cooperating and collaborating with local archaeologists, but I am not a fan of the antiquities market. That's something else I hope to have more streams and conversations about. Is it's one reason why I refuse to watch many of the videos about great vases because they were bought on this market. And it's been illegal in Egypt to export artifacts for well over 100 years. So unless the people who own these granite vases can demonstrate that they bought them over 100 years ago or that somebody did, they are likely illegal or they are forgeries. So yeah, yes, I believe in a good beard. Though it's a little longer than I like, so I will trim it some. But believe me, Atis, this video production quality is already better. This camera is much, much better. If I can get more channel members and more super thanks, I will continue to upgrade. Right now, I'm paying for the cheapo version of Restream, so it's only 720p. I will gladly upgrade if I find that I am able to afford it. So please become I am on Patreon. That is probably the best place to support me because Patreon takes less of a cut than YouTube. I also have membership on YouTube. If you prefer that, I'm fine with that. You can chip me a tip with a super thanks or a super chat or a super sticker here on YouTube, or I'm on Ko-fi. I'm thinking of also introducing a crypto wallet. I've been investigating that because some jokers made a meme coin about. So I don't want to say how that I'll buy my meme coin. It lost 95% of its value, but I might figure out how to do crypto and accept cryptocurrency just because that way no big business takes a cut and every cent that you tip me goes to me rather than to YouTube or Patreon, who are making money off me anyway. But Patreon is the best place for monthly subscriptions. I just released a new lecture for both my YouTube members and my patrons. So if you join up for membership or Patreon, you can see a nice hour-long video about Let's Talk About Atlantis, where I discuss my goals and my approaches to pseudo-archaeology. So if you want the kind of behind-the-scenes playbook on how I do this and why, and the kind of lecture that I give to my colleagues, as well as some fun stuff, that's there, as well as I think like 5 or 6 other videos from teaching videos that we created. This is the book we'll be talking about with 4 of the different authors from there, the working classicists, who are fantastic people who are working to make classics and the classic world more accessible and less privileged. So that's tomorrow. And Thursday, um, I will be talking with Muthi al-Rashid about her new book, which comes out on Thursday, Between Two Rivers. So that's Thursday. I'll have a live stream. I don't have the time yet for that one. We were supposed to record something today, and then we delayed it, and yeah. And then, and then lastly, Friday, I will be talking with Tristan Boyle, the anarchaeologist, about issues in our field. Archaeology is dead, and what we can do about it. I again apologize about my microphone. I will look into that. This is the first time I've had that happen on a live stream. I'm guessing I was talking too loud. I'm always excited um, for new finds. So yeah, so that's good Q&A. I want to thank everybody for their support. And like I said, with additional support, I can try to improve the equipment archaeology.